I never thought I'd be sitting here telling this story to strangers on the internet, but sometimes sharing your pain is the only way to truly let it go. My name is Emma, and for 8 years I believed I knew the man I married. As it turns out, I only knew half of him. The life we built. David and I met at a friend's barbecue in the summer of 2016. He wasn't the loudest person there or the one telling the best jokes. Instead, he was the guy making sure everyone had a drink, that the shy friend wasn't left alone, and that the host didn't need help with the grill. That quiet thoughtfulness is what drew me to him. After 3 years of dating, we got married in a small ceremony with just our closest friends and family. We bought a modest house in the suburbs. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. Or so I thought. David worked as a security guard at a warehouse across town. The pay wasn't great, but the benefits were decent, and he seemed to enjoy the structured nature of the work. About 2 years into our marriage, he was offered the night shift position. It came with a small pay increase, and David said it would help us save more for our future. "Just a few years of sacrifice," he'd say when I complained about our opposite schedules. "Then we can think about starting a family, maybe even a bigger house." So I adjusted. I'd prepare meals he could take to work or heat up when he got home. On his days off, I'd rearrange my own schedule so we could spend time together. I believed we were building something together, a foundation for our future. Every day I packed his lunch in that blue thermal bag he loved. Every night when he left for his 10 p.m. shift, I'd kiss him goodbye and tell him to stay safe. Every morning, I'd wake up to find him sleeping beside me, having returned sometime before dawn. For 6 years, this was our routine. 6 years of believing we were working toward the same goals, the same dreams. 6 years of utter blindness on my part. The night everything changed. It was an ordinary Tuesday in March when our carefully constructed world began to unravel. David had left for work as usual, but I realized he'd forgotten the dinner I'd prepared for him, beef stew, his favorite. It had been sitting in the refrigerator since afternoon. On impulse, I decided to surprise him by delivering it myself. It wasn't that late, only about 11:30 p.m., and I thought it might be nice to see his workplace. In the 8 years we'd been together, I'd never actually visited him there. The warehouse was about a 30-minute drive, located in an industrial area on the outskirts of town. As I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot, I noticed only a handful of cars scattered about. The building itself was large and imposing, floodlights illuminating the loading docks and the main entrance. I grabbed the thermal bag and walked toward the entrance, rehearsing what I'd say to the receptionist or whoever was manning the security desk. But when I reached the door, I hesitated. What if I wasn't allowed inside? What if there were security protocols I didn't know about? I decided to call David first. His phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. He might be doing rounds, I thought, or in an area with poor reception. I tried again with the same result. That's when I noticed a side door opening. A man in a uniform similar to the one David wore emerged, lighting a cigarette as the door closed behind him. I approached him, the thermal bag clutched in my hand. "Excuse me," I called out. "I'm looking for David Mitchell. He works the night shift here." The man looked at me strangely. "David Mitchell?" he repeated, taking a drag of his cigarette. "Don't think I know him." "He's been working here for years," I explained. "Security guard, night shift." The man shook his head. "I've been on nights for 3 years now, lady. No David Mitchell here." My stomach dropped. "Maybe he works in a different section?" I suggested, though the warehouse didn't seem large enough to have multiple security teams. "We've got 4 guards on nights," he said, looking increasingly suspicious of me. "None of them are named David." I thanked him and walked back to my car, my mind racing. There had to be an explanation. Maybe David had recently transferred to a different location and hadn't mentioned it, or maybe the man was new and didn't know all his colleagues yet. I sat in my car and tried David's phone again. No answer. I opened the glove compartment and pulled out the insurance paperwork from his last physical. The employer was listed as Sentinel Security Services, with the warehouse address matching where I was parked. I decided to wait. If David was working here, he'd appear eventually. Maybe he was on a break or dealing with an issue elsewhere on the property. After about 20 minutes, I saw a figure walking across the parking lot, tall with the same gait as my husband. It was David, dressed in his security uniform, but he wasn't coming from the warehouse. He was coming from the street side, as if he'd walked from somewhere else. Before I could get out and call to him, a car pulled up, a silver sedan I didn't recognize. David opened the passenger door, and I caught a glimpse of the driver, a man about our age. But what froze me in place was the young woman who climbed out of the back seat to let David in, then got back in herself. The car drove away, and I sat there, stunned. Without thinking, I started my engine and followed at a distance. The thermal bag with David's dinner sat forgotten on the passenger seat beside me. The investigation. The silver sedan led me to a residential neighborhood about 15 minutes away. I watched as it pulled into the driveway of a small, well-kept home with toys scattered across the front yard. David and the woman got out, along with the driver. They were laughing about something as they walked to the front door, comfortable with each other in a way that suggested routine familiarity. I parked down the street, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. What was happening? Who were these people? And why was my husband going into their house at midnight when he was supposed to be working? I waited for about an hour, hoping David would emerge, hoping there was some rational explanation, but the lights in the house eventually went out, room by room, until only what appeared to be a bedroom lamp remained lit. And still, David didn't come out. At 2 a.m., I drove home, sick with worry and confusion. When David came home at his usual time around 6:30 a.m., I pretended to be asleep. I needed time to think, to make sense of what I'd seen before confronting him. Over breakfast, he acted completely normal, telling me about an incident at work where they'd had to call the police over a suspected intruder who turned out to be a raccoon. I nodded and smiled, serving him coffee and toast, all while screaming inside at the casual way he was lying to my face. After he went to sleep, I did something I'd never done before. I went through his things. His wallet contained nothing unusual, just his driver's license, credit cards in both our names, and about $40 in cash. His phone was password protected, but I knew the code, his mother's birthday. Yet somehow, I couldn't bring myself to unlock it. Not yet. Instead, I wrote down the address where the car had taken him. I needed more information before jumping to conclusions, no matter how obvious those conclusions seemed. Over the next 2 weeks, I created excuses to leave the house when David was supposedly at work. 3 more times I watched him enter that same house and not leave until morning. Twice I saw him playing in the front yard with a little girl who couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Once I saw him kiss the woman on the front porch before they went inside together. Each time I witnessed these scenes, it felt like another piece of my heart was being torn away. Yet somehow, I maintained my composure when he was home. I continued to make his meals, to kiss him goodbye when he left for work, to sleep beside the stranger my husband had become. I set up a separate email account and contacted Sentinel Security Services, inquiring about employment verification for David Mitchell. Their response was quick and clear. David Mitchell had worked for them for 3 years but had resigned just over 4 years ago. 4 years. My husband hadn't worked where he claimed to for 4 years. So where had he been going all this time? And more importantly, where was the money coming from? Our joint accounts showed regular deposits from what appeared to be Sentinel, but now I knew they were coming from somewhere else. I checked our cell phone records next. There were frequent calls to a number I didn't recognize. It wasn't saved in my phone, but when I checked David's phone while he was in the shower, it was listed under Mike, with a work emoji next to it. Using a reverse lookup service, I discovered the number belonged to a Michael Lawson. A quick social media search revealed he was the man driving the silver sedan. Further digging showed he owned a small construction company. Was that where David really worked? By day, while I thought he was sleeping after his night shift? I was living with a stranger. A man who had constructed an elaborate lie that I had believed without question. The realization made me physically ill, but the final blow came when I drove by that house during daylight hours and saw a sign on the lawn. The Mitchells. Not just any Mitchells, The Mitchells, as if they were the original and I was the copy, as if my life with David was the shadow and that house, with its toys and that woman and that child, was the substance. The confrontation. For 3 weeks I gathered evidence, photos of David entering and leaving that house, screenshots of bank records showing withdrawals I couldn't account for, the employment verification email from Sentinel. I compiled it all into a folder, which I kept hidden in my desk at work. All the while I maintained the facade of our marriage. I smiled when appropriate, asked about his day, even made love to him when he initiated, all while feeling like I was betraying myself. But I needed to be certain, to have irrefutable proof before I confronted him. My opportunity came when David claimed he had to work a double shift and wouldn't be home until the following evening. Instead of questioning this, as I might have once done, I simply nodded and said I'd find something to occupy myself. What I did was drive to the Mitchell house and park across the street. I watched as David played with the little girl in the yard. His daughter, I assumed. She had his eyes and his laugh. It was jarring to see him so at ease, so genuinely happy in a way he rarely was with me anymore. When they went inside, I waited another hour before walking up to the front door. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest, but my hand was steady as I rang the doorbell. The woman answered. She was pretty in an understated way, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she offered me a polite, questioning smile. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for David," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. "David Mitchell." Her smile faltered slightly. "He's just putting Emma down for her nap. Can I tell him who's here?" Emma. My husband had a daughter named Emma. The name choice felt like another betrayal. We had once discussed having a daughter and naming her after my grandmother, Emma. "Tell him his wife is here," I said quietly. The color drained from her face. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Was it possible she didn't know? That she too had been deceived? "There must be some mistake," she began, but then David appeared behind her, his expression transforming from curiosity to shock to panic in the span of seconds. "Allison," he said, my name sounding foreign on his lips. "What are you doing here?" "I think that's my question, David," I replied. "What are you doing here, at the home of the Mitchells?" The woman looked between us, confusion and dawning horror warring on her face. "David, what's going on? Who is this?" "Sophie, take Emma upstairs," David said, his voice tight. Sophie. Her name was Sophie. "Not until you tell me who this woman is," Sophie insisted. "I'm his wife," I said, "Allison Mitchell. We've been married for 8 years. And you are—" "His wife," she whispered. "We've been married for 5 years. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just a secret family. He had actually married her. Bigamy, a crime in our state. David pushed past Sophie and stepped outside, closing the door behind him. "Allison, I can explain—" "Explain what?" I cut him off. "How you've been living a double life? How you've been lying to me, to us, for years? How you married another woman while still being married to me? Please, David, I'd love to hear that explanation." "Not here," he hissed, glancing nervously at the door. "Let's go somewhere and talk." "No," I said firmly. "I'm done going where you want, believing what you say. You don't get to control the narrative anymore." I turned to leave, but he grabbed my arm. "Allison, please, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, yanking my arm free. "You're a liar and a cheat. You've been leading a double life, and now you've been caught." "It's not that simple," he pleaded. "Actually, it is," I countered. "It's astoundingly simple. You made choices, thousands of individual decisions to lie day after day, year after year. And now you have to face the consequences." The door opened behind him, and Sophie stood there, tears streaming down her face. "Is it true?" she asked him. "Are you married to her?" David looked between us, trapped by his own deception. For a moment I almost pitied him. Almost. "Yes," he finally admitted. I married Allison 8 years ago. We never divorced. So, our marriage isn't legal, Sophie said, her voice breaking. Emma's father isn't. We aren't. I was going to fix it, David insisted. I was going to find a way to make it right. How? I asked. By waiting for one of us to die? By continuing to lie until you got caught? What was your endgame here, David? He had no answer for that. Of course he didn't. Men like David never plan for the moment their carefully constructed lies collapse around them. They only plan for how to maintain those lies for one more day, one more week, one more year. I want you to leave, Sophie said to him, her voice steadier now. I need you to leave right now. Sophie, please, he began. No, she cut him off. I can't even look at you right now, just go. I turned to her then. I didn't know about you, I said. I swear I didn't. She nodded, wiping tears from her face. I believe you. I didn't know about you either. Something passed between us then, a moment of recognition, of shared pain and betrayal. We were both victims of the same man's deception, and in that instant I felt more connection to this stranger than to the husband I'd lived with for 8 years. David looked defeated as he walked to his car. Not the silver sedan, but a vehicle I'd never seen before. Another piece of his separate life. This isn't over, he called to both of us. I need to explain. Neither of us responded as he drove away. The aftermath. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I moved out of our house and into a small apartment, taking only what was undeniably mine. David tried repeatedly to contact me, leaving voicemails that evolved from desperate explanations to angry accusations to tearful apologies. I listened to each one, but responded to none. I filed for divorce immediately, citing bigamy as the grounds. I also reported him to the police, though I later learned from Sophie that she had done the same. David was arrested but released on bail pending trial. The hardest part was telling my family and friends, not because they didn't believe me, the evidence was irrefutable, but because of the pity in their eyes. The unspoken question, how could you not have known? I asked myself the same thing countless times. How had I missed the signs? How had I been so thoroughly deceived? I replayed our years together, searching for clues I should have noticed, warnings I should have heeded. There were some, of course, the times he was unreachable during his supposed shift, the occasional inconsistencies in his stories about work, the way he never invited colleagues to our home or mentioned them by name, the gradual emotional distance that I had attributed to our opposite schedules rather than his divided loyalties. But the truth was, I hadn't wanted to see. I had trusted blindly, because trust was the foundation of marriage as I understood it. I had believed in the man I thought I knew, rather than questioning the man who was actually beside me. Sophie and I met several times over coffee. It was strange and painful at first, but also oddly comforting to speak with the only other person who truly understood what I was going through. We compared notes on our lives with David, finding both eerie similarities and striking differences. With me, he had been the quiet, supportive husband who worked nights to build our future. With Sophie, he had been an involved father who worked construction with his friend Mike during the day, while his wife, she thought I was his cousin who was watching their daughter at night. Two different versions of the same man. Two lives that never should have intersected but now were inextricably linked. Did you ever feel like something was off? I asked her during one of our meetings. She thought for a moment before answering. Sometimes. But whenever I questioned anything, he had an explanation that made sense, and he was so good with Emma, so present when he was home. It never occurred to me that he had a whole other life. He was good at compartmentalizing, I said, at being whoever he needed to be in the moment. Do you think he loved either of us? She asked quietly. It was a question I'd grappled with myself. I think he loved the idea of us, I finally replied, the roles we played in his life. But real love doesn't deceive. It doesn't betray. Whatever he felt, it wasn't love, not as I understand it. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears as she looked down at her wedding ring, which she still wore. I keep thinking I should take this off, but it feels like erasing the last 5 years of my life, like admitting none of it was real. It was real to you, I said gently. Your feelings, your commitment, those were real. Just because he was living a lie doesn't mean you were. The same was true for me. My marriage had been real to me, even if it had been a fiction to David. My love had been genuine, even if its recipient had been unworthy. The rebuilding 6 months after that fateful night when I delivered a dinner that was never eaten, I stood in my new apartment, surrounded by things that were entirely mine. I had a new job in a different part of the city, new friends who knew me only as I was now, not as the woman who had been so thoroughly deceived. David was awaiting trial for bigamy and fraud. Sophie had primary custody of Emma, with David allowed only supervised visits. We had both declined to give interviews to the press, though our story had made the local news for a brief cycle before being replaced by other scandals, other betrayals. I still had days when anger threatened to consume me, days when I questioned everything about myself, my judgment, my worth, my ability to trust again. But those days grew fewer as time passed. What I learned through this ordeal wasn't just about David's capacity for deception, but about my own capacity for resilience. I had built a life once. I could build another. I had loved unwisely but fully. I could learn to love again, with wisdom tempering but not replacing openness. The woman who had packed lunches and kissed her husband goodbye at 10 p.m. for 6 years was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, more cautious perhaps, but also more aware of her own value. I sometimes wonder what might have happened if I hadn't decided to deliver that dinner, if I had remained in blissful ignorance for another year, another 5 years, another decade. Would that have been better? A life built on lies, but comfortable in its familiarity? The truth, painful as it was, set me free in ways I'm still discovering. It allowed me to see not just who David really was, but who I could be without him, without the constraints of a marriage that existed more in my mind than in reality. Sophie and I still meet occasionally. We've developed an unlikely friendship forged in shared trauma but sustained by mutual respect. Emma knows me as Aunt Allison, a simplified explanation that will grow more complex as she gets older and begins to ask questions about her father. As for David, I heard he's living with his brother now, working at a gas station, a far cry from either of the lives he created with Sophie and me. Sometimes I feel a twinge of something, not quite sympathy, but recognition of the spectacular ruins of what he built and destroyed through his own actions. I don't know why he did it, why he constructed such an elaborate deception rather than simply leaving one life for another. Perhaps he couldn't bear to lose either of us, or perhaps he enjoyed the power of his secret knowledge. Maybe he even loved us both in his broken way, unable to choose and unwilling to let go. In the end, his motives matter less than the fact of what he did and the consequences that followed. He made his choices. Now I'm making mine. Last week, I went on my first date since the divorce. It was awkward and stilted at times, neither of us quite sure how to navigate these waters. I found myself watching for inconsistencies in his stories, listening for the subtle tells of deception I now know to look for, but I also found myself laughing genuinely, engaging in conversation that didn't revolve around betrayal or recovery. It was a small step, but an important one. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust another person the way I once trusted David, but I do know that I trust myself now, my instincts, my strength, my ability to survive even the most devastating betrayal. And that, perhaps, is the most valuable lesson in all of this, that blind faith can indeed blind us, but with eyes wide open, we can see not just the truth about others, but the truth about ourselves. The truth that we are stronger than we know, more resilient than we believe, and worthy of the authentic love we give so freely to others. So that's my story, not one of happily ever after, but of honestly ever after, of learning that the end of one life can be the beginning of another. That betrayal doesn't define you, but how you respond to it might. If you're out there struggling with your own version of this story, know that you're not alone. Know that the pain eventually subsides, leaving behind wisdom that, while dearly bought, will serve you well. Know that there is life after betrayal, and sometimes it's a better one than you ever imagined possible.